It's just crazy. Crazy needs help, but crazy doesn't need to be housed with women in prison.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the LGB Alliance USA News Roundup for the week ending in February 21st, 2025. We are here with Joss, Jose, and me, Arianne. First, a summary of the news. 3 new bills targeting gender ideology are introduced in the California legislature. State of California ends its fight against the Chino Valley School District over gender identity and parental rights. The Department of Health and Human Services issues official guidelines defining sex as binary and immutable. Smith College announces it's awarding an honorary degree to Rachel Levine. The NCAA attempts to clarify its enforcement of its new ban on males and women's collegiate sports. And the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism files a civil rights case in favor of a female basketball player. The gay men's chorus appearance at the Kennedy Center is canceled. The first openly gay imam is murdered in South Africa. The Kansas legislature overrides a gubernatorial veto of a pediatric transition ban. Maine awards a girls' pole vault title to a boy. And a judge issues a preliminary injunction in favor of a trans-identifying male inmate who wishes to remain in a women's prison and receive hormone therapy. We will start with the news from California. On February 14th, 3 new bills were introduced in the California legislature with the aim of combating gender ideology and protecting women and children. One bill, AB 579, also known as Yaley's Law, protects parents from accusations of child abuse for refusing to affirm their children's new pronouns. The second, AB 600, would authorize parents to opt their child out of classroom-related instruction on transgender-related concepts. Both of these bills are authored by Assemblymember Leticia Castillo. And thirdly, Assemblymember Bill Asaley introduced a bill that would repeal a previous bill allowing males on women's sports teams and locker facilities. In other words, Asaley's bill would forbid males from school sports and lockers for females. Aaron Friday from the organization Our Duty, who helped draft the bills, organized a press conference announcing the new proposed legislation. Participating in the press conference were members of the San Francisco Bay Area-based group Women Are Real, whistleblower Jamie Reed from the LGBT Courage Coalition, former San Jose State University women's volleyball coach Melissa Batty Smoose, Assemblywoman Leticia Castillo, as well as other parental and detransitioner rights advocates. And we will offer a link to the full press conference below. It should be noted that we at LGB Alliance USA have offered our endorsement for the bills. We reviewed the bills and believe they are carefully worded to target gender ideology without endangering LGB rights. And there's more news from California. On February 19th, the Liberty Justice Center announced a victory for parental rights after California Attorney General Rob Bonta declined to appeal a September 2024 court ruling in favor of the Chino Valley Unified School District's gender change parental disclosure policy. To update you on the case, in August of 2023, Attorney General Bonta sued the Chino School District over its policy that required that schools notify parents if their child requests to use a different name, pronouns, or facilities different from their natal sex. Following preliminary court rulings, the Chino Valley School Board voted in March of 2024 to update their rules so that schools would only be required to notify parents if the child requests changes to their official or unofficial records, but removed the part of the rules that required parental notification if the student requests a different name, pronouns, or facility unaligned with their natal sex. In September of 2024, a court ruled in favor of these new rules from Chino. And since Attorney General Bonta has missed the deadline to appeal this court decision, Liberty Justice Center, which represents the Chino Valley Unified School District is declaring victory. Now, turning to the national level about how Trump's executive orders regarding gender are being implemented. On February 19th, the Department of Health and Human Services released their final guidance for federal agencies, external partners, and the public implementing Executive Order 14168, defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. So basically, it's official guidelines regarding Trump's executive order that was enacted that declared that there was a sex binary. And so this official guidance officially declares that there are two sexes, male and female, as defined by gamete production, and that it's impossible to change sex. It also recognizes the relevance of biological sex in medicine and medical research, as well as protecting, quote, women's health, safety, private spaces, sports, and opportunities, unquote. The guidance ends by offering a list of definitions, including sex, male, female, man, woman, boy, girl, mother, and father. That said, not all of the news about the Department of Health and Human Services is positive. On February 20th, Smith College announced that they are awarding an honorary degree to former Assistant Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine. Why is this significant? Because Smith is a women's college and Levine is a man who identifies as a woman. Now, as disappointed as I am as a Smith alum, I can't say I'm surprised. In 2015, Smith College was one of many women's colleges that announced they were allowing trans-identifying males into its undergraduate program. It's only natural that they would start awarding honorary degrees to trans-identifying males as well. It's part of the larger picture of formally all-female institutions abdicating their mission and eroding their boundaries. And I would encourage Smith alumni listening to this to write to their alma mater expressing their disapproval for this decision. Now, more about gender at the university level. As you may remember, Trump issued an executive order protecting women's sports in schools. And the NCAA followed suit by restricting women's college sports to those assigned female at birth. We also reported last week that the new NCAA rules drew fire from critics who said it did not properly define its terminology or enforcement mechanisms. More specifically, some women's sports advocates complained that the NCAA left a loophole in their new rules by not strictly requiring biological verification of an athlete's sex. Critics say that trans-identifying male athletes could bypass the new rules by having their birth certificates amended to say they are female. And indeed, states like Washington are expediting the process by which sex on a birth certificate can be changed. However, on February 19th, it was reported that the NCAA told Fox News Digital that they will not accept amended birth certificates as proof of sex. As an NCAA spokesperson said, quote, the policy is clear that there are no waivers available, and athletes assigned male at birth may not compete on a women's team with amended birth certificates or other forms of ID, unquote. However, this clarification was not enough to satisfy women's sports advocates like former elite gymnast Jennifer Say, who took to X that same day to say, quote, but here's the thing, there is no waiver being asked for. The changed birth certificate is the proof of a person's sex as required by the NCAA policy, but pushed off to the states to verify, and the states provided the changed birth certificate. The NCAA is playing language games here. Unless a cheek swab or spit test is used to verify sex, we got no deal, unquote. In other words, we still have a long way to go before the dust of the new NCAA policy settles. The NCAA still has to figure out a way to satisfactorily enforce its new sex eligibility requirements, rather than punt this issue to state governments, which may have a different agenda. And what have you got, Jose?
Thanks, Arianne. In another sports-related news, a civil rights complaint has been filed with the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights on behalf of a 15-year-old named Francis Stout, a Washington high school basketball player, allegedly punished for refusing to compete against a trans-identified male athlete. The complaint claims the Tumwater School District is investigating Stout for, quote, misgendering her opponent, violating its policies on bullying and harassment. According to the complaint, before the game, Stout asked the school's principal and athletic director whether a player on the opposing team was a biological male. The administrators allegedly confirmed that they had been notified the player was male, but denied Stout's request to have the player removed. As a result, Stout chose to sit out. The complaint further states that Principal Zach Suderman ridiculed Stout's mother, asking, quote, "Are you telling me that your daughter will never get knocked down or potentially injured by someone bigger, stronger, and faster than she is while playing sports?" Following the controversy, the trans-identified athlete involved, Andy Rooks, responded in an interview stating that had he known Stout was uncomfortable, he would have sat out. Rooks also acknowledged the biological advantages of male athletes and expressed opposition to trans-identified males competing against women in the Olympics. When asked why he still chose to compete in girls' basketball despite recognizing the biological difference, Rooks replied, "I've never been that good at basketball." Washington state law allows athletes to compete based on gender identity rather than biological sex. In light of Trump's executive orders, Turnwater School District defended its policy, stating, quote, "The state's legal framework remains valid unless explicitly preempted by federal law, which generally requires congressional action rather than an executive order." We hope the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights conducts a full investigation into these allegations and implements all necessary measures to safeguard the sex-based rights of female athletes in Washington. In another story that's caught attention, a cultural institution is facing controversy. Earlier this month, the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington announced their upcoming performance titled "A Peacock Among Pigeons," designed to spotlight the, quote, LGBTQ plus themes and kick off Pride Month celebrations in Washington, D.C., coinciding with the city's hosting of World Pride 2025. However, the chorus was met with disappointment when the Kennedy Center canceled the performance. In a heartfelt statement shared on social media, the chorus expressed their frustration, emphasizing the power of music to promote understanding and foster community, and lamenting the missed opportunity to showcase these values through their art. The decision to cancel the concert came shortly after President Donald Trump restructured the Kennedy Center's board, appointing new members aligned with his political views and assuming the role of chairman himself. Some are questioning whether the cancellation was politically motivated. Gene Davidson, executive director of the National Symphony Orchestra, explained that the decision was based on financial and scheduling issues and was made before Trump's appointment as chairman. Instead, the Kennedy Center chose to present The Wizard of Oz, which they deemed suitable for Pride celebrations as well. This situation raises questions about the growing intersection of politics and art. Could it be limiting the diversity of expression within cultural institutions? Let us know what you think. Moving from the intersection of politics and art, we turn to a much darker story. Muhsin Hendricks, known as the world's first openly gay imam, was tragically shot and killed in South Africa this past weekend. Authorities are investigating whether this was a hate crime. Hendricks, a trailblazer in both the gay and Muslim communities, made history in 1996 when he publicly came out as gay. He founded the Al Ghurba Foundation in Cape Town, which provides a crucial support to, quote, queer Muslims navigating the complexities of reconciling Islam with their sexual orientation and gender identity. Hendricks also became the executive director of the foundation, offering a lifeline for those in need. South Africa's post-apartheid constitution was the first in the world to protect people from discrimination based on sexual orientation. And in 2006, it became the first African nation to legalize same-sex marriage. Despite these achievements, violence and discrimination against LGB individuals remain pressing issues. Hendricks was also a powerful voice for interfaith dialogue. Speaking at the ILGA World Conference in Cape Town last year, he said, quote, "It is important that we stop to look at religion as the enemy." His commitment to authenticity, even in the face of threats, was inspiring, and his work will continue to impact the gay and Muslim communities worldwide. And with that, I'll hand it to you, Joss.
Thanks, Jose. And turning now to good news from Kansas. We reported in last week's news segment that Governor Kelly of Kansas had vetoed the Help Not Harm Act, and that Kansas State Senate President Ty Masterson vowed to override the veto before the ink of her pen dried. And override the veto they did. The dominantly Republican legislature in Kansas was able to easily override the veto, and the Help Not Harm Act was signed into law February 18, 2025. Among its key provisions, the Help Not Harm Act prevents state funds from being used to promote gender transition, prohibits healthcare providers from transitioning children experiencing gender dysphoria, and allows for civil action to be taken against healthcare providers should they violate the law. On to things that never happen, except they do and pretty frequently. Icons, the Independent Council on Women's Sports, notes on X that Maine awarded the girls' Class B championship pole vault title to a male athlete competing in the girls' division. Unsurprisingly, if the trans-identifying athlete had competed in the boys' division instead of the girls', he would have tied for 10th place with his pole vault of 10 feet 6 inches. The two girls he edged out both pole vaulted 10 feet even, so he beat them by 6 inches. The first place in the boys division pole vaulted 13 feet 6 inches. Just to really hammer home this discrepancy, the boy who won the boys division pole vaulted 3 feet higher than the boy who took first place in the female division. As reported by Jesus Mesa for Newsweek, the Maine Principals Association, the MPA, announced it would not enforce Trump's executive order banning males from competing in female sports. The decision by the MPA, which governs high school sports in the state, could result in a loss of federal funding since the MPA's decision violates Trump's federal directive. And in news just reported by PA for Sex-Based Rights, Pennsylvania is also engaged in a similar situation of non-compliance with Trump's executive order. In this case, Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic Association, the PIAA, has stated that, quote, "Where a student's gender is questioned or uncertain, the decision of the principal as to the student's gender will be accepted by the PIAA," end quote. PA for Sex-Based Rights adds that in 2023, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission changed the definition of sex to include gender identity. It is likely that this regulation, not a law, is what Pennsylvania school districts may be using regarding the definition of sex. A longtime pole vault official and coach, Alan Cornwall, said of trans-identifying athletes competing in women's sports, quote, "Numerous parents, coaches, athletes, and volunteers have told me that this is wrong, but no one dares to address it," end quote. We must take a stand and push back against this belief-based ideology that most people don't even agree with, but are apparently too afraid to openly oppose. Recall the New York Times Ipsos survey that found 94% of Republicans and 67% of Democrats said trans-identifying athletes should not be allowed to compete with women and girls in sports. When exactly did we become so fearful and conflict avoidant in this country? Moving now to Trump's executive order regarding prisons. 2 federal judges have issued temporary injunctions of President Trump's executive orders around trans-identifying males in female prisons. The most recent ruling by U.S. District Judge for the District of Columbia, Judge Royce Lamberth, applies to all 16 trans-identifying males currently housed in federal women's prisons. The case, brought by 3 trans-identifying males in Washington, D.C., argued that they would face violence and sexual assault if housed in men's prison. They also claimed it would be cruel and unusual punishment. But here's the thing. How is it not cruel and unusual punishment for women to have males housed in their prisons? Trump's executive order mandated inmates be housed according to their biological sex and that federal funding for cross-sex hormones for inmates be ceased. These policies are a complete 180 from the guidance the Bureau of Prisons got under the Biden administration. Under Biden, prisons were required to house inmates based on their quote unquote current gender expression. According to Reuters, via the US Department of Justice, approximately 2,230 trans-identifying inmates are housed in federal custodial facilities and halfway houses, and about 2/3 of them, around 1,500, are trans-identifying males. So I'm curious, Jose and Arianne, what do you think about the situation with prisons?
It just goes to show how hard it is to really properly target to really handle the prison issue, because first of all, Trump's executive order was pretty limited because to begin with, it could only really apply to federal prisons, and a vast majority of people who are prisoners are not in federal prisons, they're in state prisons. So there are lots of states that still have this problem of men and women's prisons, like California, where I'm at, has some of the most high profile cases of that. So even when Trump has this very narrow executive order for federal prisons specifically, it's very hard, as we can see with courts, for us to get by the courts. And it's so ridiculous because of all these like trans related, gender identity related issues we talk about, this seems to be, I would argue, one of the most outrageous, right? Putting males in women's prisons. And it's one where you would think it would also be most possible for there to be a compromise when it comes to safety. You could have special parts of men's prisons that are dedicated to vulnerable male prisoners. And so trans identifying male prisoners who are in danger can go to special wards. Like you said, why should women be the ones that bear the responsibility of having to deal with male violence?
Yeah, I seem to recall at some point when all of this stuff came up and there was a lot of discussion around it, different organizations and individuals pointed to the Geneva Conventions, and that these allowing males to be housed in female prison violates Geneva Conventions. And on that regard, they were kind of making the plea for an outside body to intervene in the United States to prevent this from happening, because it is absolutely dangerous. And we have evidence of that over and over again. There's so much also ambiguity. Men can just say, and under the Biden administration, they could just say that they were trans identifying. And then, we have evidence of men doing that to get housed with women in state prisons, and then immediately coming out of prison and re-identifying as male, because it was never a thing for them. This was just an opportunity they saw.
I don't even, it leaves me speechless, quite honestly, how little empathy people seem to have for these women. I remember when, the executive order came out, so many people on the left were using this hyperbolic language about, oh, this is state sanctioned rape against, trans women, as they call them. And people talking about all the risks to them. And I just couldn't help but think those are the same risks that women have been exposed to for, since they've been housed with males, and no one seemed to care before. So it's just remarkable, I guess, the double standard. And you would think the left would care about these women. They are some of the most vulnerable people in our society at the intersection of so many categories of oppression, as they say, but they just don't care.
Yeah, you said that so well, Jose, that they are the most vulnerable. And when we think about some of these, the men that could be housed with women, some of them are extremely unhinged and problematic. And in this case, we saw this week the arrest of the cult leader, Jack Ziz. The cult is called the Zizians. And the bulk of them are extremely mentally unwell, extremely violent, purposefully violent. But one of their tenets is that they should use whatever force and means necessary to achieve their their end goals, and most all of them are trans identifying males. So now that they've been arrested, it's a question to me of where will they be housed? Because their crime spree and murders happened in multiple states, I would assume it would be a federal issue, but now we have this injunction handed down blocking Trump's executive order, which, as Arianne mentioned, would only cover those federal prisons anyway. So what happens with that? Are women now subject to being housed with extremely violent, extremely unwell males because they identify as females?
Yeah, and I mean, I've spoken to people about the reporting on the Zizians, how the papers will call the trans identified male cult leader like she and her and how you're like, oh, so a woman's in charge of this violent cult? That sounds so weird. And then they're like, oh wait, this is actually a trans male. And how much cognitive dissonance you have to hold in your head about, like, yeah, trans women are women, just like women, they're the same, blah 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 blah. But then you have this violent cult leader who has this whole theory about how there's split parts of your brain, and like one part can be male and one part can be female, and how trans women are uniquely enlightened somehow. And it's like, okay, so how we're supposed to take it seriously? There's a woman, we can put them in a women's prison when they're convicted, when they themselves are admitting to all these totally nut job theories, and are and seemingly conceding in their whole philosophy that they're weird, that they're different, that trans women are unique. So something, just what will take to click in the minds of some people about how ridiculous this is.
Yeah, that's a very good point too, because it's so extreme, the things that he was putting forward, and it seems like there's such an effort of force of will from the leader to be the right way. You had to be vegan, you had to be trans. It's amazing to me how long this went on too, because this was over a number of years that they were active, and it is possible that there are still some of the Zizians out there. It is alleged because at one point the leader had faked his own death successfully. He's obviously been caught. He's not dead, but he did in fact fake his own death. Upon being caught, just a side note, this recently in Maryland, he was caught. He pretended to be dead. So his mugshot is with someone holding his face up because he's still pretending to be dead. They just are non-compliant. Like, they're extremely oppositionally defiant. But his best friend, also trans-identifying male, is at large. Also allegedly died around the same time that Jack allegedly died, but didn't die. So there's probably more Zizians out there, and they act in retribution for things that they feel like are done wrong against them. And it's not like we're a one-on-one type situation. These are men who are in their 20s and 30s. In one case, they were responsible for the murder of an 82-year-old man in California. They're responsible for the murders of one of the cult members' parents, who I would guess were in the 50s or 60s. It's like violence for the sake of violence almost. And now potentially they could, all the ones that have been caught could be housed with women, and that's just really disturbing.
Yeah, and I think this is a good example where cults operate by deception. They create an alternate reality and convince people that this alternate reality is true. So if there's ever a time where you should not use someone's preferred pronouns, it's when they are in a cult. And it makes no sense to take this, this axiom of we should always use someone's preferred pronouns. We should always say someone is the gender they claim to be and apply it to a cult setting. It is, if there's ever a time where you're not going to use preferred pronouns, do it for someone who is in a cult. It's okay. Like, really, it is. San Francisco Chronicle, you don't have to use, it makes no sense to use preferred pronouns for a cult, please.
And it really confuses things. Like for me, I'm a true crime fan. So I first heard about the story from Grizzly True Crime, so nod to Grizzly and Gazilla. And the story is so crazy. When she was telling it, she kind of gave this caveat of, hey, if you're vegan or if you're trans, please don't come at me. I'm gonna mess things up. I'm gonna be all over the place on pronouns because this is a complicated story. It's all over the place. And so she was kind of interchangeably using male and female pronouns to talk about these individuals, partly because like it was kind of like the before and after, before they had begun some level of transition. But moreover, it's just, it really confuses all of it when we use chosen pronouns and we use chosen language that doesn't reflect reality. And it does no one in any service besides that particular individual, and someone who's been so extremely violent. Why do we need to respect those pronouns? To me, it doesn't make sense.
I think the vegan and trans thing is interesting because animals have a sex, they don't have gender. And so I just, I was vegan for a while, and for, if you pay attention to animals and you respect their rights and you know that they want to live their whole lives without suffering and all that. And then there's the thing of animals, it's the female of most animals that are the females that are exploited, the most. Because that's how it happened to me. I saw feminism and veganism as things that were compatible. So I just don't see how you can then believe in trans that is so misogynistic. How
It's really striking that they would take up this torch so vehemently. And they were, if people didn't agree with them on veganism, that's cause for assault. They were wandering around neighborhoods wearing all black and just being creepy and freaking people out. And so people that saw them out lurking in the neighborhoods and whatever would report on them because there's something always off.
I think in that article that you shared, Arianne, doesn't it say that one of them cut ties with their parents by sending them a link to a video of like a animal abuse in the context of like probably the meat industry or something, and they just texted them like, this is what you're responsible for, and then just completely cut their parents off after that text. So I just thought, that's how unhinged they are.
It's just crazy. Crazy needs help, but crazy doesn't need to be housed with women in prison.
That is very well said. And on that note, thank you everyone for joining us for another news roundup, and we hope to see you again next week.